So I'm happy to start the session about around the temple, holy places and contested spaces in Israel, though we're not speaking only on Israel in this session. And our first lecture will be of Adam KLIN-ORON, which is an anthropologist of religion who has written about the reception of new religious movements in Israel, the attitude of Israeli new... Now I had
new agers to Jewish law. I'll do it.
Okay. Now let me
we're like a family here.
And also about channeling in Israel. And also he works at the Van Leer Institute.
I wrote 2 of these with Marianna, so she should know this by heart. Yeah. I will not be speaking about the temple or sacred spaces, but I will be speaking about Israel, so 1 out of 3 isn't so bad. Okay, I'm actually speaking about history, but rewriting individual sacred histories, cultivating while channeling. I want to begin with a story. I'm going to begin by silencing my cell phone, but then, okay. Adi's story. At the age of 48, Adi was not happy. Although she ran a successful business, was in a happy marriage, and loved her children, she was still miserable. The insomnia she was suffering from was getting worse, haunting her with symptoms during her waking hours as well. She was desperate, as she said. For weeks I couldn't leave my bed, suffering from dizziness so bad that while lying down with eyes closed, the vertigo rolls you and throws you out of bed. For 3 years, I thought my life was over. Really, I saw no hope, and nobody knew what I had. Nobody could help me. I took all possible tests. They didn't find anything. You feel you have no control over yourself and your life. One day, she dragged herself out of bed for a consolation visit to a family whose young son had passed away. Walking back home from this visit, she felt a mounting sense of dread, accompanied by heat waves and pressure in her head. She knew something was happening, but she felt she had no control over it. She went into the kitchen and was washing the dishes as she heard a strong, echoing male voice. "Adi, Adi," it called to her. She describes her reaction to this as being excited, scared, trembling, and confused simultaneously. She was afraid for her sanity, but also felt a sense of déjà vu, of inevitability. The voice identified himself as the deceased son of her friends, and then, with a strong air of urgency and pressure, dictated 3 full pages of foreboding messages, warnings about impending bankruptcy and a coming disease to his family. Not cheerful stuff. All that happened next, Adi recounts, came from the strong need to preserve this unique and exciting experience. And what happened next was that Adi started to read about New Age channeling, books that talk about taking control of your life. And gradually, Adi's channeling, which in the first months still included, as she says, unwanted transmissions that drove me crazy, focused and cohered, and mostly this channeling calmed down in both content and form. Some elements of the experience remained, but it stopped being unique and became a lot less exciting. Today, she is always the one who initiates channeling. From her house in suburbia, with the support of her family, she runs a successful practice, holding channeling sessions with many loyal clients. The frightening, physical, unexpected, and ominous tones of her first encounter with channeling have completely disappeared. Optimistic, self-assured, emphasizing mind over matter and self-divinity, her messages echo American channels such as Jane Roberts, Helen Schucman, J.Z. Knight, and Sanaya Roman. Adi has, in essence, undergone conversion in 2 stages. First, she had a revelation that changed her life, but then she domesticated and filtered this revelation into a much milder form of belief and practice. Finally, she erased this act of domestication and claimed full unity between both stages of channeling. She moved, in a sense, from seeking to dwelling. Channeling, a New Age form of spirit mediumship, emerged in the United States in the late 1960s and slowly spread until it peaked in the mid-80s, or in Israel, where I conducted my field work, in the early 2000s. We have this delay of between a decade and 2 decades. Except with neoliberalism, we adopted that pretty fast. A channel claims to be serving as a direct conduit for non-material entities, such as angels, light beings, or God. Alongside this relinquishing of control to an external spirit guide, channeling teaches a creed of extreme self-reliance, or rather, self-authority. You, in other words, manifest your own destiny. The paradox of power and control lying at the heart of channeling, a form of possession preaching self-control, deserves its own paper. But for now, suffice it to say that it is a stable paradox, well suited to the Western middle-class ethos of channels and their clients. Channels see themselves as empowered and empowering by and through their practice and their creed, as gaining control of their life. And yet, many of them, like Adi, began channeling in an event that was neither optimistic nor entailed a sense of control. It was the culmination of a crisis, a wild affair, raw, an event that did not lend itself to easy interpretation. As the soon-to-become channels struggled to make sense of this experience, the wild was soon replaced by the cultivated, reshaped into the framework of New Age theology of self-divinity. The contact with the non-material entities was not abandoned, but it was domesticated. In this process of domestication, the entities, their messages, and the sensations of the channel were all radically altered. I believe wild channeling offers the energy needed to jar certain people out of their current lives, to half convert them, so to speak, but it does not provide a satisfactory framework to understand these lives in a new light. For that, people turn to the culturally mediated and ready-made creed of New Age channeling, which completes their conversion but also standardizes it. Let me now describe both forms of channeling, wild and cultivated, beginning with the end result, cultivated channeling. In cultivated channeling, the channel, alone or in front of an audience, brings through information from a spirit guide. Done either verbally or through automatic writing, there is a distinct sense of being possessed by the guide, or rather a lack of sense of self. From a phenomenological perspective, there are 4 key features to this experience. First, the information feels like it arrives on its own, with no sense of volition. Second, there are no strong physical sensations. In fact, the channels often say they feel disembodied, as if they are not in their body at the moment. Third, the experience is pleasant and mild, easy to enter, easy to exit, and not taxing. Finally, it entails a certain amount of amnesia, with some channels not remembering these information sessions at all, and others remembering only bits and pieces. While cultivated channeling is much milder than the wild form of channeling I will describe next, it is still very much distinct from full waking consciousness, even when some memory of the session is retained. As Sarah testifies, while channeling, I know what's going on. Not the small details, but if a chair will move or a knock on the door is heard, I'm here. And I also know what's being said by me, by my mouth at least, not exactly by me. But my sensation is that I'm somewhere else. I mean, let's say that after channeling, switching to cooking dinner for the kids requires an effort. If cultivated channeling allows the channels to rearrange their lives and their worldview in a way that makes more sense to them, then wild channeling is often the crest of a wave of chaos and confusion. As Sapir puts it, when I was 27, I woke up one day and I felt that something was missing. I couldn't understand what. I was young and beautiful. I had a family. I had a job. I had everything. Ostensibly, everything was okay, and something inside, I felt a hole in my gut, a hole that needs to be filled. Hannah felt her marriage was crumbling. Adrian was miserable because of chronic obesity and kidney trouble, and Dana simply said that she didn't want to continue being the person I was. This crisis, physical, mental, or both, is often prolonged and frustrating and involves a strong sense of losing control over one's life. And then one day, something happens. The content varies widely, but a sense of, actually not so widely, but it varies, but a sense of being compelled or ordered is quite common. When Adi got her first message from the deceased youth, it was urgent and fast, and she begged him to slow down. Just in addition, she didn't just beg him to slow down. He said, write down this message to my family, which is, again, about bankruptcy and disease, and deliver it to them. They're still in the Shiva. He just died like 2 days ago. And she says, I can't. They'll never speak to me again. And he insisted and insisted and insisted until she just wrote the message and took it to them, and they haven't spoken to her since. So she had a good notion. Hannah says she felt like someone took over my brain. The sense of losing control, the fact that no one else around them can see or hear the visions, and the intense nature of the experience or experiences brings many channels during this phase to fear they are losing their mind, as was the case with Shelley. I thought I was losing it, walking around the house and hearing it was a very monotonous, the voice is very monotonous, it sounds very mechanical, Shelley, 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 and I go, what? And other people aren't hearing it, only I hear it. While channeling, unlike its cultivated counterpart, does not usually involve any form of amnesia. There is no suppression of a sense of self, and it is not pleasant. The channel is very much there, involved in the experience, body and soul, with heightened emotions and strong bodily sensations. Chaya felt tingling, heat, cold, shivering, and a lot of energy. And Dana woke up one night in bed, terrified, feeling, she says, like Jesus, with 2 fountains of energy gushing out of here. It hurts, and I don't know what to do with it, like where to put, what to do, like what am I supposed to do with it? While channeling is usually a unique event, occurring only once. It does, however, make the possibility of communicating with non-material entities viable, but not in the form of wild channeling, which lacks an organizing ideological framework, is too frightening, and entails a strong sense of losing control. In order to establish a permanent relationship with the entities, the channels first had to mold the powerful experience of wild channeling into a practice that was under their control, and also made sense to them. And for this, they turned to New Age channeling, both because they were familiar with other New Age practices and because it specifically posits the existence of non-material entities and the ability to communicate with them. New Age channeling also allowed them to retain their former middle-class beliefs in personal accountability, but now gave these beliefs a religious sheen, and more importantly, a force of conviction that provided the new channels with the power to change their lives. As wild channeling is brought under control, it loses 2 of its distinct features. Its auditory quality wanes, and it is replaced by an inner voice, and the bodily sensations that accompany it, tingling, heat, and so on, disappear altogether. The calmer experience of cultivated channeling is also apparent in the self-empowering and bright messages common in channeling. Adi no longer speaks of impending bankruptcy and disease, but of humanity's infinite potential to absolute happiness and fulfillment, of consciousness work that will allow each person to reach his potential, and of the inevitability of a beautiful future. I, she says, went from darkness to light. This is also humanity's path. To conclude, while channeling greatly differs from the cultivated variant, it is unpredictable, unexpected, very rare, deeply embodied, and intensely emotional, either exhilarating or terrifying, or sometimes a little bit of both. It is also, almost without exception, set against the background of a personal crisis. It does not, however, offer an ideology of solution to this crisis, and for that, people turn to the ready-made ideology and practice of New Age channeling. They shift, in a sense, from a contested space into a solid, familiar shrine, and reweave their own personal narrative from one of chaos to one of order. If cultivated channeling can be likened to flipping on the flow of electrical current and getting things going in an orderly fashion, wild channeling is like lightning. During a storm, a massive electrical discharge forcefully breaks through, forming new channels as it seeks release. Thank you very much.
Remarks, questions? Yes.
I have a question. In my family, I have a young niece who is, what we call that, a medium, because you said that channeling appeared in the 60s. In fact, I believe it's a very old phenomenon, but we didn't call it channeling. What difference could you make in mediums? Because she started having, having incredible pains in her ears for years, and when she was young, she would always spend the whole night yelling, and then she understood afterwards that it was because she was visited by people who wanted to talk through her. And when she understood this, of course the pains left, but mainly they were trying, she said, to clear her ears so that she would hear, which of course nobody else can hear. But she now does it as a job, but she can only do it once a week, so she does something else on the side because she's exhausted, as you said, doesn't remember, so that corresponds to a lot of the things you said, but she will be doing it for people who can, ask her to get in contact with somebody. So she's not really possessed by some kind of entity that would, come like that. And the horrible things the horrible periods for her are for, in a Catholic country, even though she doesn't believe in anything, but All the Saints' Day, when all the, the dead people want to talk to her, and for Easter. So what difference will you establish between that type of phenomenon and what you described?
I think it depends on your perspective. What I mean is that phenomenologically speaking, cultivated channeling is, I think, almost identical to mediumship. There aren't enough phenomenological studies by anthropologists, let's say, or psychologists of mediumship, but recent ones. In the beginning of the 20th century, it was pretty popular both to do this and to study this, but it has kind of disappeared for almost a century and a bit coming back. So if you're talking about altered states of consciousness, I think there are a lot of similarities. But the content of the message and what you might call the social milieu is not exactly identical, in the sense that, first of all, channels do not channel deceased people, as they almost as a rule. As they say, what could they tell me? That people have a spirit that lingers after death? I already know that. Channels say it. I don't know that, but they do. And the deceased person is usually pretty confused. So it might be in the initial, the wild phase, but later on it would be entities that are very calm, very organized, have transcended the body, and they know the truth about reality, so the knowledge is more formidable, the channels would say. And the content would be about empowerment, self-divinity, New Age kind of theology, which is not always the case with mediums. Still, there are a lot of also the people that began channeling, like Jane Roberts and Helen Schuckman. Yeah, they were influenced by spiritism and spiritualism and theosophy, and it was there, but they reconfigured that into something more individualistic without an overarching structure around it. Still a lot of similarities on the ground. So I think it's similar, but not exactly identical. I will also comment that what you talk about, so having something that's very painful, that leads up to a kind of opening up, is not just the case in channeling. This is the kind of a heal thyself kind of thing. Yeah, this is pretty common in a lot of, even among, I don't like to make the comparison because the structures are too different, but shamans begin like that. In some actual shamans, I mean, in Mongolia, begin by an illness, a disease that can either kill them or turn them into shamans, for instance.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just pick up from really the last sentences you both talked about, because you said in your lecture that these channelers, the wild channels, happen because of some crisis, and then in order to interpret what has happened to them, and in order to get it into some structure, they will turn to New Age and interpret and become cultivated New Age channelers. This brings to mind a sort of, and I hope I'm not too bold here, a sort of a comparative religion, naturalistic explanation in which people have crisis. In rare occasions, they have some mystical experience, let's call it that, we can call it many names, and they will turn to some interpretive structure in order to place their experience in and cultivate it in a certain fashion. In the past, maybe they would turn to shamanism, they would go to the local shaman or whatever, or they would turn to Kabbalah if they were Jews, or Sufism, etc., etc. And today, well, the main structure of interpretation is New Age or contemporary spirituality. What do you think?
It depends on what hour of the day you catch me in the sense that sometimes I think, you know, the sociologist in me says this, or the comparative religion scholar would say, I think there's something there. But the anthropologist always says, but where's the empirical evidence? In the sense that I only know this field well. I suspect there's something of the kind, in the sense that it doesn't have to follow this path, but one of the paths that leads to mystical experiences is this path. And the interesting thing for me was that I didn't see this when I started studying channeling, because they don't talk about it so much. They talk about the initiating experience, but they don't remember it exactly like this, as a rather horrifying event. But then you dig a bit deeper and they say, yeah, it was rather horrifying. And they describe something that was pretty common among channelers and pretty different from what they do now. So I suspect that if you do a wider survey of even people who only do religion, in a sense, you would find something that's slightly similar to yours. But in other hours of the day, you know, the cultural anthropologist in me says that even the wild channeling experience is not as wild as I described it, in the sense that they say I didn't have any experience with New Age before, but usually they did. They did some meditation, or they did some Reiki, which is actually pretty similar to channeling in some aspects of the practice. I mean, even the theology of Reiki is pretty similar occasionally. Or they did some tarot reading, or just examples from the field. So I think they were kind of not only going through a crisis, but also going through some sort of training to interpret that crisis in a certain way, and then the two converged. I don't think these are mutually exclusive explanations necessarily, but I think there's the mechanism I describe here is wider than just in channeling, but I can't substantiate it enough. And I think, by the way, one of the problems is that this the wild channeling phase is filled with what I would describe as horror, in the wider sense, not, you know, horror slasher movies. And because religion today doesn't do horror, then scholars of religion don't study horror. And I think it's kind of muting down the aspects that are unpleasant. As you can see in their stories, I think that's kind of a wider thing, which is why it's kind of ignored. But I might just be wrong, and it might just be channeling. I can't see why, but maybe it's just the reality of it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, can you pass them? Sorry.
That's the advantage of speaking shortly. You can get more questions.
Thanks. I'm asking this out of just curiosity and ignorance. Is there something, would you see the same thing globally, what you're describing, or is there...
About channelers?
Well, I'm asking this because of the publications on New Age Judaism that were shown to us yesterday. Is there something kind of culturally specific to channeling in Israel or in a Jewish context that you've observed, or is this kind of a universal religious experience?
In this specific story, in this specific instance, talking about movement from wild to cultivated, In channeling, I don't think it's specific. In a wider paper, I wrote some of the examples are not from Israel. And actually, in a wider paper, I didn't dare to write some of the examples are not even from this century. But I'm an anthropologist, relying on text is kind of iffy for me, so I'm not sure if I want to go there. But Boaz says, obviously you should do that, but yeah. But in another sense, channeling among New Age practices in Israel is one of the most globalized. It doesn't have a lot of unique Israeli features, with two slight exceptions. One, which I've studied more and one less. One is the entities. In Israel, some of the entities are rabbis, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rambam, or Moses, or Hari. Pretty popular, Hari. He wrote like 3 books after he died, the last 10 years, but a lot less when he was alive. But does it influence the content? Not so much. With some exceptions, but usually it doesn't matter that it's Moses, the content is still self-empowerment and self-divinity. He will mention, if it's Moses Judaism, a bit more, but not a lot. The other aspect is that, and this is something I haven't studied enough, is that among some of the channels, while if you ask them what do you believe in, what's your ideology, it would be pure self-divinity. You know, it would be like from A Course in Miracles or something, usually American, but today it's widespread. But if you actually dig at what they do and the practices and the books they publish, it would have some more folk religion, as it's called. So some Ain Hara, some practices to repel bad luck, which are usually taken from Jewish contexts. This is never really arranged into a structure, and this varies among channelers, and it's not with all of them. Some of them, while they say my ideology is X, their practice is X plus Y, and the Y would be more local. But it usually doesn't stick so much. So in the sense that their followers would want more of X, of the globalized thing, than the Y, the local thing. But again, I'm saying this I'm not so sure about this.
I also have a question about the narrative that they tell you about how their lives were miserable and negative before and then all the after. And as you already said, they are already indoctrinized, so to say, into the New Age discourse. So if they're already so much indoctrinized, why wouldn't you not be suspicious of this narrative talking about the negative story of their lives before the first channeling, and about even the first channeling as it was? Maybe you should, I don't know, I just feel that when I talk with informants and they say something about the other world, how they used to be, how their neighbors are, or how their families are, I'm more suspicious. So I say, okay, this is their story because they want to make a dichotomous, I don't know, a break from something, or to put an array of good and bad. I wouldn't say that this is something that really happened to them.
Oh, I didn't say it was something that really happened. What I said is that they had a miserable period.
How did
This, well, that's a good question, but the answer is, in anthropology, we walk a razor's edge. We have to believe that what people tell us, they take seriously.
They do.
We don't have to believe that what they tell us is actually the truth. So it's a very thin line, in the sense that you can fall into saying, well, they're lying to me and to themselves, but then you're not really understanding them. But on the other hand, saying what they say is like the manifest truth is not very helpful as well. And I'll give you an example. For instance, when I asked them initially, how did you begin channeling? They said, it was this wonderful experience. And then they describe it, and it's not wonderful, it's horrible. You know, they describe it as horrible, but they say it's wonderful. So there, I take both of what they say seriously, but I'm not suspicious of either side more than I'm suspicious, but of both sides in this sense. The other example is that, do they say that the break was extreme while it wasn't? Yes. Yes, I didn't speak about this here, but I remember actually Adi. I interviewed Adi from the story here, and I told her, she said, I was so sick, and then since this day, I opened to channel, or I think that was the term she used, I opened to channel. I haven't been sick a day in my life, and she was sneezing and coughing through this speech. You know, so she was, as I talk with her, what's going on here? So obviously she was telling herself a story and telling me a story because I'm interviewing here, and there's a version to tell an interviewer, and there's what's going on the ground. Try to be sensitive to both of these. Is the break so major as they say it? I think this was conversion. I don't use that term lightly. I think this was conversion. I don't think it was flipping of the heart, because I don't think that usually happens. But I might be mistaken. You know, Paul kind of disagrees with me, but I think it was a gradual process that was still extreme, not as extreme as they want to remember it, and not as sudden as they describe it, but it was still a significant change. I didn't say it was for the better. What I said is that they say it was for the better. For saying if it was for the better or not, I need to interview people who are not them and decide what better means. And I didn't go into that. I don't think it's an invalid question, but I didn't go into that.
So thank you very much.